Either one, y'all. Y'all think it's me. I'm telling you, it's her.
Start your day with that. That is my message to the world.
Right in. Welcome to the Inspiring with Purpose podcast. I am Mondo Davis, and we are your co-hosts. I'm so excited about today's episode. We are here with Stephanie Weston, and she is an executive leader at a billion-dollar global company. She has overcome some insurmountable odds in her life by finding her true identity and not allowing rejection to stop her from becoming the person that God has called her to be. She has successfully raised 4 boys with her husband, Derek, and I'm so excited about her sharing some of the things that she has learned to help her overcome rejection in the church, in corporate America, in life, to stay on the course of doing what she feels that God has called her to do.
So 4 boys and 1 girl. Is it? Okay.
Come on.
Yes.
So let's jump in.
I know. Definitely. Stephanie, I've only heard little bits and pieces of your story, but in regards to just really talking about identity and wholeness, talk to us about, about your life. I mean, about your testimony.
I mean, it's a blessing, right? Like I should not be, all the things that you said about me, my husband, my family, my job, like my life was not set to that course, right? So I know that it was the Lord. I was adopted when I was 9 months old by 2 really amazing people who were flawed and had their own sets of issues and problems. And my life took such a drastic turn from the time that I found out that I was adopted when I was 6 years old. And I was told in a very not nice way, basically, I'm not your mother. And I'm like, it made sense because I didn't look like anybody, but I was just like, this is how my family is. I don't look like anybody, but it's okay.
Right.
And so I think at that was the root of where my rejection kind of started. That if I had to find out where that pinpoint in place was, it was that time, because I felt like somebody didn't want me and the person that got me didn't want me either. So it became something that I was always trying to figure out who I was, who I looked like. I had this identity crisis because I was light skinned. I had long, good hair, right? And Black people teased me. White people didn't accept me. I was just in this situation where I was trying to figure myself out. And so couple that with enduring many, many years of sexual and physical abuse and being told that I'm supposed to do this or don't tell anybody because nobody's going to believe you anyway. And I have a memory where I went to my adoptive mother and told her that I was being abused. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes you can have that experience in life where you feel it. Like I can remember the smell. I remember it was the summer. I remember where everything was. I remember the breeze that went by. And I said it to her and she looked at me and she said, why would you lie about that? You're just always making stuff up. And I'm like 8.5 years old. Where am I making that up from? Right. And so I learned at that moment that I couldn't trust anybody. Nobody was there to really protect me. Wow. And so I went through and I endured that. And then I came to meet my adoptive father because they got divorced when I was 3. So he was out of the picture. And then he comes along, right? And he's married and they live in this nice house in Philly and Mount Airy. And I was living in North Philly in an apartment with my mom and my sister. And I'm like, yes, I have struck gold, right? Because he brought me in and they've got grass and they've got 2 bedrooms and an extra bathroom. And they were in church, like diehard in church Christians, And then that was that, right? So there was this perception of this bad life that I came out of, and I was able to come in at 10 years old into this new life where it was, I was at church and I'm learning about God. And then I'm like, well, that scripture that talks about in Psalms, like when your mother and father forsake you. Like I thought that was a load of garbage, right? Because I had these people who they forsake me, but God, like, why would you allow something like this to happen to this innocent child?
Wow.
Right. But we fast forward. I accept Christ when I'm 13. There was a sermon about getting a crown, right? And I'm just like, yes, I'm gonna get a crown. How do I get me one of those, right? So I accepted Christ, and I'm just like, okay, I think I can figure this out. My very religious parents in a very small, intimate church where everybody knew everybody's business, and it was just very.
Did you end up going living with your dad to live with your dad?
I did.
Okay.
I lived with my dad and my stepmom when I was 10.
10. Okay, gotcha.
When I was 13, my adopted mother, she passed away. She died from cirrhosis of the liver, so she was a drinker at a very young age. My sister came to live with us, and so now it's a new dynamic, right? It's a completely different, drinking, smoking, partying over here. Now we're at Sunday school, Bible study, choir rehearsal, Girl Scouts. Like we're just going through the motion. And I came to understand God to be something more of someone I would never be able to attain to his level of love or status. Or if he cared about me, he didn't really show me. That's how I felt. That's how I felt about God. And I was promiscuous when I went to college. So I was at this church, very sheltered. Everything was like this. So I couldn't talk about what happened to me because they wouldn't understand it. And I didn't think they would believe me. Mm-hmm. So I started to internalize that. And I went to college. In my first year of college, I was like this wild animal, right? And I was like, I've got freedom. Let's go. And like, this is my body and I'll do whatever I want to do with it, with whoever I want to do it with. And you can't tell me anything, right?
Yeah. And
so, I lose my virginity in college at 19 years old. And I was lost. I was very lost. Yeah. I come back home. I take a year off of school. I decide, I got to get myself together. But in the same thread of this, I've got this very religious family who lives one life in front of everybody. And then there's this whole different life at home, right? So it's the deacon, the head of the deacon ministry, and it's the pastor secretary, and they are the epitome of church. But then they come home and they don't talk to each other. They sleep in different rooms. They don't talk to me. Like it's a very crazy display of what God is supposed to look like.
And this is on top of how you already feel about God, coming from what you were from before,
Right, right. So I was like,
I'm
like, this God is not necessarily for me.
Wow.
Right.
So anyway, we fast forward and we get into my, teenage years, and I'm in college, and I come back home. I get my own apartment because I just didn't want to be bothered with them. And I meet this guy, and he was much older than I was. And I'm like, well, I guess this is the right next best thing to do. So, I get into this relationship with this guy. I get pregnant. And I'm like, oh no, this is not for me. And then I had no conviction because I felt like God didn't care about me anyway. So whatever I did with my body, he wouldn't care because he didn't care about me when people were abusing my body.
Wow.
So I have an abortion, and I'm like, God, it's impossible for God to even want to know who I am, right? Mm. That's how I got to that point. And so I was probably about 22, and I just stopped. I just took a pause, and I'm like, God, if you really are God, you've got to speak to my life and help me understand why I've gone through all these things and why you weren't there. Like, why weren't you there to help me? And it hit me like a ton of bricks, right? I'm 22. I'm thinking that the world is mine, but not really, right? And then I meet Derek, right? So I'm like, oh, he's a pretty good looking dude. I think you might answer my prayer, Lord. And Derek is 10 years older than I am. And so we start like dating, and I'm thinking like, this is it. Like, this is cool, right? And we were dating for about a year and a half. And he's like, I have twin sons. I said, come again? We've been dating all the time, and now you're telling me about this,
bro.
And he's like, I just found out, and they're 5 years old, and I'm like, whoa, right? So I really had like another pause. I'm like, God, listen, the rejection is now still building up, because now the rejection is from 6 years old up into 23.
Wow.
And it's just compiling, right? And so we kind of walk through that process, and I'm like, well, I really love this guy, and like he's got these kids, and I mean, I guess we should try to figure it out, right? And so and we were dibbling and dabbling, sneaking around a couple times. And so one day we said, listen, this is it. We are going to be celibate. We are living for God. We're not doing anything. You can't come over here. I can't come over there. That's it. Right.
Right.
Now I'm like, God has answered my prayer, because Derek was like, yes, we're going to do this. So that was in August of 1998. And so we go fast forward to December of 1998. And he says, I want to go talk to you with the pastor. So you know what I thought? I've been holding out. I'm about to get married, because I done held out. And praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord. Glory to God.
It was worth it. It was worth it. And so I get into the pastor's office, and this is at the same childhood church, because he started coming to my childhood church. And we're sitting down, and I look at him, and Derek is bawling. I'm like, I mean, is this a good cry? Do you want to be with me? Like, I don't understand what his tears are. And he turns to me and he goes, I didn't realize how much I loved you until I hurt you. And I'm like, oh, you didn't hurt me. What are you talking about? Right. He said, I had a one night stand and she's pregnant. I was like, come again? Come again, boss? So then I'm thinking to myself, this is absolutely ridiculous, right? Again, I'm looking at God like, right. really, bro?
You stop having sex. I'm trying to do things right.
Wow.
I'm trying, right? Like, I'm really trying. And then we get down to, that's in the early part of December. So I'm like, I cut it off. I was like, goodbye. Good luck with that. I am not going to be a part of this foolishness, right? This is what I said. I got 2 kids and a baby mama. And now you want to bring another kid in and another baby mama? That's just not my life. And I said it, and he laughs this day. I go, I'm light skinned and cute. I do not deserve that. and so I go to church New Year's Eve going into 1999. And I go to church. He comes to church with his whole entire family. Like, I could care less. You could bring the whole world to church. I'm still not talking to you. Right. I go home. I lay across the bed, guys, and my stomach like moves like this, like a big wave. And I was like, "Ooh, what is that all about?" Mm. Well, long story short, Stephanie was like 5.5 months pregnant from the last hoorah in August.
Wow. 5.5?
5.5, did not know it. Look, I was working out. I was like slipping trips. I was like,
right there.
Wow.
That was a good one. No morning sickness, no nothing. Wow. And so I said, God, I know that you probably be really upset if I got another abortion, but like, I can't do this. Mm. And I remember calling Derek and telling him. And he was happy to hear from me because I hadn't talked to him. So he's like, oh, hey, how you doing? You want to go to dinner? No, listen, I'm pregnant and I'm going to have an abortion, but I was just figuring I'd give you a call, let you know. And then hung up the phone. He was like,
wow.
What? Wow. What are you doing?
Oh my God.
Mm.
So then it just kind of, that happens. I tell my parents, who proceeded not to speak to me for a good month or so. The church, I had to get up in front of our entire church and tell the church that I was pregnant, that I had sinned and had a baby. We had a baby and I was not not married. And Derek stood up there he stood right up there with me. I had to sit in the back of the church. I was ostracized. I think the only thing that they didn't do was put a big old scarlet letter A on my chest. Right. And I'm like, God, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I've humbled myself. I've repented. And I've always been of the mindset that when you repent, you don't have to stay in this state of remorse, because when you repent, you let it go. Like, I'm like, okay, I made a mistake. God, you forgave me. Like, where are we going from here? Right. Like, that's just how I thought. And so it was 1999 was such a hard year for me. It started off with the pregnancy, and then the parents, and then the pregnancy. And it was just really, really rough. Derek asked me to marry him on my birthday, April the 4th of 1999. And I was like, well, I guess I ain't got nothing else better to do. So yeah, I'll marry you.
Is this after the child was born, or you're still pregnant?
I was still pregnant.
Oh, still pregnant. Okay.
I was still pregnant, and I was pregnant, and so I got engaged April the 4th of my birthday. Miles wasn't due until like June, but the amount of stress that I was under during my pregnancy with my family, I was in the hospital like once a week, and he wound up coming in April. So he came April 21st. So he was very early, and I had complications with it, not the delivery, but just after the delivery. And I remember I had this engagement ring. I'm in this hospital, and I'm like, okay, things have got to get better. But my parents wanted me to be married before I had the baby. And I just felt like I wanted to have a wedding the way that I wanted to have it. And that's not going to change anything. Mm-hmm. And all the while, guys, we were still celibate. Like, we were still celibate from August. So now we get to April, we're still celibate. I'm engaged. My parents didn't come to the birth. No one was there but Derek and I. And it was pretty rough, right? That was rough. And I go to his house after I had a problem, and I had to like lay down. I had a spinal tap. Anyway, I had to go back into the hospital. I came home. My parents didn't help me. So I had to literally change my son on my knees with my head on the bed, because I couldn't even lift my head. And at that point, I felt that God was the furthest away from me. And this was like the hardest thing that I ever had to deal with. And he was nowhere to be found.
What was your narrative at that point when you were going through that? I mean, did you feel like God was punishing you, or?
Yeah, because I always, growing up in church, we weren't ever taught about covenant. We were taught about condemnation, right? So you were condemned if you didn't live right, you didn't do right. It was condemnation, condemnation, condemnation. It wasn't until I actually got to Seeds of Greatness church where I learned about covenant. And with the covenant, you can be convicted, but you're not condemned. Right. Because I still walk in my covenant. I'm still entitled to these rights, right? But I didn't know that. So at that time, Lisa, I was feeling like God was just punishing me, and that he didn't love me, and that no matter what I did, it was never going to be good enough. I would never be good enough to get his love.
Wow.
Right?
Had there ever been any contact with your biological parents, or any effort in this journey to connect with them?
Yes. So fast forward to 2 years ago. It was 2 years ago. So you guys are like got on it. So 2 years ago, I got a new job, and normally, Lisa will appreciate this, I buy a new purse when I get a new job. It's like, yes, I've got a new job. This is what I want to do. So this time I decided to hire an investigator to look for my biological parents. I'd always been something I had thought about for many, many years, but I was always told that, why do I need to do that? That's not important. If they wanted you, they would have found you. We're not good enough, apparently. It's just all this guilt and wanting to know like who I look like. And so I did the investigator. October 31st, I get a letter in the mail, and I found my biological mother and father, both of them.
Wow.
And she had passed away. My mother had passed away maybe 2 or 3 years prior to me finding her. She passed away from cancer. Wow. And my father was still alive. And my mother actually had 2 more daughters. So I have 2 sisters that I found 2 years ago. Wow. I'm 20 years older than the youngest, and 15 years older than the oldest in that set. And it was like a full circle of, okay. But by this time, think about the backstory I just told you, that identity had been a struggle, and I had to struggle through figuring out my identity. By the time I got to finding my mother at 46 years old, 46 years old, I knew who I was. I knew who I was in Christ, and that's all that mattered, right? So I had finally come to that decision where I know who I am because you love me. And if nobody else loves me, if nobody else comes up to the plate, if nobody else asks me to forgive them, I know that you love me and I know who I am. So it wasn't so much of I figuring out my identity when I found my parents and such. It was more about just the personal part of it, like, oh, that's who I look like, or oh, that's who, that's her story. And so it was a blessing. It really has been a blessing, but my identity wasn't found when I found my parents. I found my identity walking through this process.
Did you find, okay, because we kind of skipped like that whole segment. I'm still figuring out, so what happened? Like, so you eventually got married?
So we had Miles in April. My parents pretty much put me out of the house after I had him. And Derek was like, let's go. You're going to come live with me. So now I'm like, well, I got a scarlet letter. I got this this unwed baby now. I've got this man. I'm going to go live with him. I might as well just do this whole thing, right? So we walk into Derek's house and I walk upstairs to the bedroom and he's like, where are you going? I was like, I'm going to the bedroom. He was like, we're not married. So you're going to have to sleep in the guest room until we get married.
Oh,
okay.
Well, okay. I gotta sleep in the guest bedroom, which has given me such empathy for people because we are so quick to judge a person's situation. What makes it wrong to live with somebody before you get married is sex. It's having premarital sex. People judged us thinking that we were having sex, but we were sleeping in 2 separate bedrooms until the day we got married.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. So we were roommates, but nobody saw that because we had this big dark cloud over what's happening and nobody ever asked, right? It was always an assumption. Nobody ever asked.
Wow.
And so when we decided to get married, and we decided in July we were going to get married in October of 1999. And his daughter was born in August. And we got the paternity results a month before the wedding. And so I'm just like, I cannot even make this life up, right? Like I just can't even make it up. And so we did get married. Sad to say that nobody from my family came to our wedding. My father didn't walk me down the aisle. None of those things happened. But again, God showed up for me and and as I look back over my life, I see God's winking at me through every instance of that I went through. Like everything that I thought I couldn't make it. I thought I was at the end of my rope. Something would happen that would change the narrative. And I know that was the Lord changing the narrative in my behalf. Mm-hmm. And so when I was walking down the aisle, everyone kept saying, well, I'll walk you. My Derek's best friend said, I'll walk you down the aisle. I was like, no, my father is alive and he's not here. I'll walk myself down the aisle. Like, that's just it. I'll do it by myself. Wow. And I remember walking down the aisle. And as I'm walking down the aisle, Derek is walking up the aisle. Now I'm like, I'm an event planner.
Right.
I have it in my mind. I get there, you turn, you smile, right. Like you have this, right? He's walking toward me. And I'm like, so Lisa, I got the face, like, okay, what are you doing? But it's happening. You're messing up my whole thing. So he gets up to me and he's like crying, like I see tears again. I'm like, oh, if this man tells me he's not gonna marry me, I'm gonna murder him right here. But he looked at me and he said, I just want you to know that you will never have to walk by yourself again. And he walked me the rest of the way down the aisle. And it was like the most impactful thing that had ever happened to me because it was God using Derek to show me that I'm not by myself, right? Good. I never will have to be by myself again. And so we got married and, family figured themselves out and things happen and drama, all kinds of things happen. But God has been so faithful in my marriage because we said that we were marrying before the Lord and that was what's going to keep us. Come hell or high water, baby mama drama, all kinds of issues that happen. We just did not allow that to shake our foundation. And so now we'll be celebrating 24 years of marriage.
Oh my goodness, that is so beautiful.
That's a beautiful story. Wow.
No, Stephanie, I'm wondering, was the church hurt?
Hold on. Okay. Before you go to the church, because you're skipping over a whole lot of stuff. Right. So Stephanie, this is really powerful because you come to this point of rejection, finding out that you're adopted, and it's kind of done in a very crass way. Oh, by the way, I ain't your mom.
Yep.
And you're like, dang, what did I do? Right? You're a kid, y'all. I'm 6 years old. Goodness gracious. Probably trying to get a snack or like, hey, mommy, can I go outside? I'm not your mom. So it's like, I'm obviously adding a little drama to that, right? So I don't know.
That's exactly, you got it right.
Okay. So she comes at you like, boom, like back up. And you're like, whoa. So now this thing is imprinted. Because that's your first encounter with understanding something about your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's perverted, it's twisted in this moment. And then you tack on sexual abuse, you tack on physical abuse, then you tack on the rejection from the people that you love the most and that you think are supposed to love you, but they're doing like this. And then it shows up in a way where the church, where it's supposed to be a safe place, push you on, I mean, blast, right?
No blast. Yep.
You know, you're in the back of the church with your head down, like, oh yeah, don't. And it's like, dang, this is supposed to be a safe place for me. And then the man you fall in love with, right? As soon as you make the right decision, it's like, all right, we're gonna add another baby into the picture. And by the way, it's not yours. Like, sorry. So adding insult to injury, you have this thing happen perpetually over and over and over. Where did you come to a point of accepting your identity for who God has called you to be? Was it the moment when Derek meets you down the aisle and says you'll never have to walk again alone? Is it a moment where God speaks to you in your quiet time?
Yeah.
How did you overcome the rejection to become a successful woman you are today as an executive, this global billion-dollar company? You're, you know, successfully doing it with your husband, you know, over 2 decades of marriage, 5 children. I mean, where was that breaking point? Was it on the aisle when you were walking down the aisle, or?
No, I think it's been a process. If I'm honest, it's something that you walk through every day. Every day, I grab more of my identity, and and I say that because as I'm having better connections, I think that pivotal moment was maybe when I was 26, 27 years old, and I kept feeling like I wasn't enough. I kept feeling like I wasn't enough as a girl, as a little girl. I wasn't enough as a teenager, as a young woman, as a wife, as a mother. Like, I'm not enough. And I really audibly felt like I heard the Lord said that you aren't enough, but I'm enough. And then it's like, it's so interesting to me because years later, Elevation does this song, Jireh, and the exact words of Jireh, I remember audibly hearing that 20 years before the song even came out, right? Because it says, you are enough, so I'm enough. Like, I'm enough. And I think as I started to really embrace the fact that I'm enough because of who I am connected to in Christ, the bondage, the shackles of rejection just started to fall off me.
But how do you accept that? How do you accept that? And, you know, I guess that new identity as to what he's saying, when the person that's saying it, it's like, I don't even really know. I know you're God, but I don't even know if I really like you because of everything that's happened. Where were you? You got all these questions. How do you accept that from a God that you
have questions about?
Yeah.
So that's a great question. And I think it's because when I was going through the first couple years of marriage, I kept thinking to myself, this is a wrap. Like, this is for the birds. Like, I don't want anything to do with any of this. Like, let me take this kid and we out, right?
Yeah.
And I was in church. We had changed churches. We were in this church, another Bible church, very foundational, godly truths I was learning. So I was in church. I think my first inclination was to leave church, but my spirit would not allow me to just walk away from church, right? And I think some people get so hurt at church that they leave church so they can't heal, because you're not going to be able to heal outside of church. Like, it's such a crazy thing to think about, but you're not going to heal when you leave church from church hurt. You've got to find a safe place that you can just rest and learn and observe and watch and see if people are really authentic and genuine, and then begin to open up your heart. So it's a lot of work that you have to do internally and personally. And it's making conscious, intentional decisions that, in spite of all of this, I have to lean into the Lord more. I've got to keep leaning in, because I can't believe that the guy that brought me through all this stuff doesn't care about me, because the enemy will have you believe that he doesn't care because you are going through this. So you've got to lean in. But if you're not in church or connected, you're not going to learn. You're not going to know what the word of God says, because if you're away from church, you're not really reading like that. It's just giving your mind an opportunity to replay the horrific things that happen. Yes, I could most definitely have been on drugs, could have had a million kids, could have done lots of awful things, but God, like, but God, I did not find myself as a part of the statistic of an abused, sexually, molested, physically abused, adopted, light-skinned girl in North Philadelphia. All of those things were a recipe for me to not be successful.
Wow.
So at 25, I was able to start to understand that I've got a purpose. Like, God, you got a purpose for this. You got a purpose for this pain. There's a purpose for this. Like, just show me what it is. And that's kind of how I started, loving him the way that he loved me.
And how were you able to move forward now with this married relationship? I mean, for Derek to say those words, oh my goodness, he just like dropped the mic right in the middle of the aisle. That's just like so loving.
Good job, Derek. I see you, bro.
I know. I'm just trying to think about that, like based off of what you had walked through with the sexual abuse. How did you make room or even do that healing to be able to fully receive him as the man that he was and the leader of your home?
It wasn't easy, but my love language is words of affirmation, right? And so because I was starved for love as a child, I was very open and vulnerable. And so the slightest little bit of attention, I'm like wide open, like, okay, I'll take it. But it hurt me a lot because a lot of people used me in ways because I was so vulnerable. But what I thank God for is that I never stopped being Stephanie, right? Like I never stopped being transparent. I never stopped, I never hid my stuff. I told somebody one day that my transparency, I used it as a mask for so many years because I felt like if I could tell you everything about me, then you can't talk about me because I already told on myself, right? Right. So I told on myself, so you don't have nothing to say.
Talk about
right.
Right. But I did it in a way to just be so open and vulnerable to not get hit and not get hurt. Right. Because it was my story to tell. And if I told it, you can change the narrative, but it still doesn't change the fact that I told you first. Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where, and then with Derek, we both walked this thing out, right? Like we were committed. There were days we were not committed to each other. And I'm not even going to lie. We were committed to Christ.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if we weren't committed to Christ, we would have gotten divorced probably 17,000 times by now. But we were committed to Christ, and we always said divorce wasn't an option. Like it wasn't an option. Now, can I be real with y'all? I told him that if you divorce me and you go to be with one of those other two women, I'm gonna find you both and kill you all. So then it won't be nobody. But I thank God because even in that, guys, like it was a very tumultuous relationship with his children's mom, his son's mom, and God is so faithful. And I say that to tell people that you might be praying for something and it may seem like it's never going to get answered, right? I have been praying for this relationship. I promised Derek the day that I knew about the kids, I said, I would never say anything negative about your children's mother. I'll never do it. I'll never call her out of her name. I'll never be nasty. That was me. I'm not going to be this way. And she did some horrific things that will make your eyes pop out, put them back in and pop out again, right? But I held to that. And I believed and I kept believing that this relationship was going to be something that God was going to get the glory out of. And 2 years ago, she called me and she said that anybody that could love her sons the way that I loved her sons could not be a horrible person. And I was just like on the phone, like, oh my gosh. And we were doing our vow renewal, our 20th vow renewal 4 years ago. And the boys were all the best men. So all 4 of our sons were our best men. And at the reception, the twins, they said, we've been calling you Miss Stephanie for years. Like you've always been Miss Stephanie. And they were like, well, you're our mom. And we have to call you mom. Hey. And so she knew that. And so our son Isaiah was talking to his mom a couple years ago and was like, I love my dad. He was like, but I love Miss Stephanie. And she was like, she couldn't, it just disarmed her. So she called me to ask me to plan their 30th birthday party with her. And together we planned their 30th birthday party. And we stood side by side and we took pictures together and all these things that I would have never thought were even a slight possibility. She got up in front of all of her family and friends, because that's who mostly was there, and just said how much she appreciated me and how good I was to her sons. And so like it took years and years, but it just re-encouraged me to know that God still hears your prayers. It just takes time. It just takes some time sometimes.
Yes.
Wow.
Those seeds matter. You know,
So-
even though you didn't see the fruit of it right away, I mean, they were planted.
It was on stony ground.
Right. Oh my
Right.
goodness. Oh.
That's amazing. So, Stephanie, when you think about others who have experienced this, right, and they may not have the strength or the fervency to persevere, and they're thinking about giving up, maybe, you know, they're in a depression right now, or they're thinking about maybe committing suicide because they're like, no one cares about me. I'm rejected. I'm adopted. I'm, you know, I didn't get breastfed enough, you know, whatever.
Right.
The fill in the blank. Okay.
Yeah.
And they
Like, life
need,
keeps just getting worse,
like
you know?
there's so much stacked up against me. It's like, why am I even here?
Right.
Right. Why am I taking up oxygen right now? What would you say to that person who's thinking about quitting because they're so discouraged? And how would you encourage them to come over the hump, to overcome the rejection so they can walk in their true identity?
Yeah.
That's good. That's a really good one. I mean, I've been there. I tried to commit suicide. I've thought about it even beyond that. And it's the deepest, darkest place. And if you've never contemplated it, you will never understand what that feels like, because it's almost like it feels better for me not to exist than me to continue existing in this. Right. But what I would say is your life matters. Your life, you were created intentionally on purpose for a purpose. And even though it seems like everything, all the odds are stacked against you, that there's no hope, it's in the middle of that deep, dark place where you can see a glimmer of hope, whether it's listening to this podcast or reading a scripture or hearing a song, and you hear something that just plucks your heart. That was for you to know that you've got to go on one more time. Just go one more step. I think people want to see the end. People see me all the time and they're like, you're so put together and so happy and so this and how, you know, and they don't know my story. And I said, that's it. You don't know people's story. The person that has the biggest smile, the brightest laugh, the greatest heart could have gone through the most hellish of times, but God brought them out. So you don't see smoke on me. You don't see me. You don't see the fire that tried to consume me. But what you see is the glory of God, and how, because I took that one step, not a leap, it wasn't a leap of faith. It was one little step at a time. And if you keep taking that one step, and you also get connected to a church, even if you want to be lost in church, meaning that you want to go to the biggest church you can find and sit in the very back on the last row, if nobody knows you, do it. Because it was in those very seats when I came into church, especially Seeds of Greatness, that I sat in the very back, that just listening. And I went from the back to the next row, And now Derek's like, we might as well just sit on Pastor Jerome's lap because you want to be right there. But you have to do it. Like, you have, and do it afraid, and do it without expectation, because when God knows that he's pulling you, like, and he knows that he knows our plan. And Jeremiah 29, I was going to get a tattooed on my body, but I did not. But I did get faith. So 2 years ago, I got faith put on my arm.
Oh.
And faith for me was being able to know that even though I don't see God's plan, that he's got a plan for me, and that my life matters, that I'm enough. And so anybody that's struggling with those things, you just have to remember, if you don't remember anything else, is that you weren't a mistake. I don't care how you were born. I don't care what the circumstances were. That's something that I had to learn. And then after I learned it, I went to counseling. I see a therapist, right? I see a therapist now. Yes. Because there's things and challenges that come up in my life that I want to understand how I navigate it, because my past, it will affect my future. It will affect my children if I don't get those things under control or find the root cause of what's going on. So doing the work is really important, and it's taking the super and adding the natural. So there's therapy, and then there's Christ, right? And you put those together, and that's a recipe for a successful, happy life.
I love that. That is so good. And I remember what you said earlier when you talked about running from the church won't heal you from the church hurt.
It
and
won't.
I think that same thing applies in life, because physically, if I cut myself, I'm going to heal. But when we get cut in our souls, we stay in that space until we actively pursue healing.
Until you pursue it, yeah.
So we have 40, 50-year-old, 30-year-old 20-year-old grown men and women who are still 6-year-olds.
That's true.
Because of a fracture to their soul.
But I think some people don't even recognize it, and they say, well, this is just the way I am. You know, this is just the way I am. But it's not. That's not who God created you to be. And
if we try to run from it, everywhere you go, there you are.
Right.
So the same thing.
And the other thing too is that we in church, I mean, you guys are in church, you're in ministry, I'm in church, I'm in ministry. We've got to be sensitive to people coming in who have been hurt by church. And a lot of times the vernacular, the way we do things, our standards and all that are not something that a person is accustomed to, or if they were, you don't know the backstory. You don't know that I had to stand in front of my entire church and tell them that I was pregnant, what that did to me emotionally, psychologically. So people are coming in with this stuff. So we've got to be flexible. We have to use the spirit of discernment and understand that everybody is not where you and I are in their walk with Christ.
That's so good. That's so good. If there were any final thoughts, or let's say one final thought that you can leave, what would you say to someone who is listening to this? And again, they've heard what you said. They heard your testimony. It's so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing, Stephanie. It's incredible. But what would you say to that person that's listening, saying, okay, like, I hear what you're saying, Stephanie, but you're different, right? You're light-skinned and cute. I ain't light-skinned and cute, right? So I don't know. Like, you got some other things going for you that I don't have. You know, like, if somebody would just sit up here and be like, all right, that sounds really good. You're on this podcast. You're successful, you know, but I don't know if I could do that. You know, what would you say as a final thought to any of the listeners who may find themselves in that position?
It's going to sound cliche, but I held on to that scripture that I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. And I don't have a college degree, and I sit as an executive director of a major corporation. That is not because of me. Everything that I have, every step that I have made, every great accomplishment that I have in my life has nothing to do with Stephanie. It is because God is in my life and he walks with me. So everything is possible. Don't think that it's not possible because you don't have light skin. You don't have the college degree. You don't have the muscles like Mondo. Yes, you might not have any of those things, but anything is possible. Anything is possible if you just trust God.
So good. Any final thoughts, Steve?
That's so good. Something that always stems in my mind, especially now hearing more of the full story, is really that identity piece, Stephanie. You know, so I'm thankful that you shared so much about that, you know, because I know I'm just going to talk about women and even myself, the journey that I walked through, you know, with some of the pieces of your story, I'm able to relate to it in such a deep way. But for you to come to a point outside of what you see on the outside and the things that you've gone through, to be able to come back to the word, to say, all right, Lord, I'm like pausing, I'm stopping everything, I'm silencing the noise. Who do you say I am?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Because you can't go wrong with that. And God he's not going to lie. He's not going to, you know, just say things that are not true just to make you feel good. You know,
and I think people have to do a confession, right? Like people have to, you know, those people that are in that dark spot, you have a Bible app, go look and see all the things that God says that you are and write that out for yourself. You know, I am a winner. I'm not a loser. I am the righteousness of God. Like I had to write out a confession, put it on my mirror in the bathroom so I could see it and recite it until I believed it. Like you got to say some stuff until you see it. Like you don't just go to the gym and work out one day and say, oh, I can lift 150 pounds. No, it's a process. And so when you start doing it and seeing it more, then all of a sudden you're like, I believe what I say, what I've been reading.
Good.
So you feel like after a while of saying it and believing it, your life will start to line up with it.
It has to, because our you know, Mondo said in the very beginning, we're overcome by the words of our testimony, but also our words are powerful. They have life and death. So if you keep speaking death over yourself and saying that you're nothing and saying that you're nobody and saying that you don't belong here, you're going to have what you say. But if you say the things that God says about you, it's impossible for that not to reshift your spirit and help you refocus.
That's right. Because life and death's in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat the fruit thereof. So we want to leave you with that thought right there. What are you sowing into your future? What are you prophesying over yourself what life are you speaking so that you can live that life in your future? Thank you so much for tuning in with us on the Inspiring with Purpose podcast. Again, I'm Mondo Davis. We are your co-hosts, and we had an incredible time with Stephanie Weston here. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for joining us. This was so powerful, so life-giving. We deeply appreciate you and the power of sharing your story. And if people want to find you, Stephanie.
Event planning. What your business event planning?
Oh, well, you know, I do that on a referral basis only now.
Okay. So if someone wants to find you,
they can find me on Facebook. I'm like Stephanie
right.
Weston on Facebook. You can message me there.
Okay, perfect. So that's where you can find her on Facebook, Stephanie Weston. Aside from that, remember that each of you were born with a solution to someone else's problem. When you step into that solution individually, collectively, we can change the world. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We look forward to seeing you in our next episode. God bless.
God bless.
Come on. Baby, I'm not running around looking for nobody else. I've got one thing